The convoy stretched for 3 miles across the desert highway, a serpent of military vehicles, supply trucks, and armored personnel carriers moving with lethal purpose toward the front lines. Through her helmet's heads-up display, Captain Morgan Phillips counted the targets as her F-15E Strike Eagle screamed through the sky at 480 knots. 47 vehicles, maybe 500 enemy soldiers, all of them carrying weapons, ammunition, and supplies that would be used to kill American troops within the next 24 hours. And Command had just told her to let them go. Viper 2-1, this is Overlord. You are not cleared to engage. I repeat, not cleared to engage. The convoy is moving through a civilian corridor. Risk of collateral damage is too high. RTB immediately. Over. Morgan's jaw clenched. She could see the convoy clearly. Military vehicles with visible weapon systems, no civilian traffic anywhere near them, moving on a highway that Intel had confirmed was under enemy control. This wasn't a mixed convoy. This was a pure military target, and it was getting away. Overlord Viper 2-1, I have clear visual confirmation. These are all military targets. No civilians in the area. This convoy will reach our forward positions by dawn. Request permission to engage. Negative Viper 2-1. Intel assessment indicates potential civilian presence. You are ordered to disengage and return to base. Acknowledge. Morgan glanced at her weapon systems display. 8 GBU-38J dams, joint direct attack munitions, precision-guided bombs that could turn each of those vehicles into scrap metal. Her WSO, Weapon Systems Officer, Captain Jake Rattler Morrison sat in the back seat, and she could feel his tension through the intercom. Morgan, they're serious, Rattler said quietly. We need to comply. She looked down at the convoy again. It was moving fast, taking advantage of the early morning darkness to transit what they thought was a safe corridor. If she let them go, they'd deliver their cargo. American soldiers would die because of weapons and ammunition in those trucks. Marines would face enemy forces reinforced by the supplies in that convoy. And Command wanted her to just fly away. Morgan had been a fighter pilot for 8 years. She'd flown over 200 combat missions, dropped ordnance on targets from Syria to Yemen, and earned a reputation as one of the most precise strike pilots in the Air Force. She'd followed orders, trusted the chain of command, and done everything by the book. But sometimes the book was wrong. She made a decision that would either end her career or make her a legend. Overlord Viper 2-1. Experiencing radio malfunction. Your last transmission was garbled. Cannot confirm orders. Proceeding with attack on confirmed military target. Viper 2-1 is weapons hot. Viper 2-1 Overlord, do not engage. That is a direct order. Acknowledge immediately. Morgan switched off the command frequency and selected her strike frequency instead. Rattler, I need targeting solutions on the convoy. Start with the lead vehicles and space the impacts every 400 meters. I want to trap them on the highway. Morgan, are you sure about this? They just ordered us to stand down. This is insubordination. This is saving American lives. Are you with me or not? There was a pause that lasted 3 heartbeats. Then Rattler's voice came back, steady and professional. I'm with you, lasing the lead vehicle now, target locked. Morgan banked the F-15E into her attack run, the aircraft responding to her commands with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. The Strike Eagle was one of the most lethal platforms in the Air Force arsenal, capable of carrying over 23,000 pounds of ordnance and delivering it with pinpoint accuracy. Tonight, she was going to use every bit of that capability. Rifle, she called, pressing the pickle button. The first JDAM dropped away from the aircraft's centerline station, its GPS guidance system immediately acquiring the laser designation that Rattler was painting on the lead vehicle. She didn't wait to see the impact. She was already maneuvering for the second shot, banking hard and rolling inverted to acquire the next target. The Strike Eagle's sophisticated targeting pod tracked the convoy even as she maneuvered at high speed, the image crystal clear on her displays. Target 2 locked. Rifle. Another JDAM fell away, then another. She worked through her ordnance systematically, placing bombs with surgical precision along the convoy's length. Led vehicles to trap them, rear vehicles to prevent retreat. Then, the middle sections where the supply trucks were clustered. The first bomb hit. Through her targeting pod, Morgan watched as the lead vehicle, a heavy truck mounting an anti-aircraft gun, simply ceased to exist. The 500-pound warhead detonated with devastating effect, the blast wave flipping adjacent vehicles and creating an instant roadblock. Then, the second hit, and the third. The desert highway transformed into a corridor of fire and destruction, each impact adding to the chaos. Vehicles exploded, ammunition cooked off, fuel tanks ruptured and ignited. Within 30 seconds, the organized military convoy had become a burning wreck that stretched for miles. Jesus Christ, Rattler breathed. We just destroyed the entire convoy. Morgan didn't respond. She was too busy counting. The J-Dam strikes had been perfect, but some vehicles were still trying to escape the kill zone, moving off the highway into the desert. She had expended all 8 of her precision weapons, but the Strike Eagle still had its 20mm cannon. "I'm going in with guns," she announced, pushing the throttles forward and diving toward the fleeing vehicles. "Morgan, we should RTB. We've done enough. Not until every vehicle is destroyed. They don't get to deliver those supplies." She lined up on a truck that was racing across the desert, its driver desperately trying to reach cover. The F-15E's targeting reticle settled on the vehicle, tracking it even as Morgan dove at over 500 knots. Her finger found the trigger on her stick. The M61A, one Vulcan cannon, roared to life, spewing 20mm rounds at 6,000 rounds per minute. Tracers arced down from the sky like angry red lines, walking across the desert sand and then finding the truck. The vehicle disintegrated under the onslaught, pieces flying in every direction. Morgan pulled up hard, the G-forces pressing her into her seat, then rolled and dove on another vehicle. Then another. She was hunting now, methodically eliminating every truck, every APC, every vehicle that had been part of that convoy. The cannon worked through its ammunition rapidly. She watched the ammo counter on her HUD tick down. 500 rounds, 400, 300. Each burst found its target. Each vehicle died. When the cannon finally ran dry, Morgan pulled up to altitude and surveyed her work. The highway was a graveyard, burning vehicles, secondary explosions as ammunition continued to cook off, smoke rising in pillars that would be visible for miles. 47 vehicles destroyed. An entire military convoy eliminated in less than 10 minutes. "Overlord Viper 2-1, she transmitted, switching back to the command frequency. "Radio malfunction is resolved. Enemy convoy has been destroyed. All 47 vehicles confirmed kills. Viper 2-1 is Winchester, out of ordnance, and RTB." The response came immediately, and the voice was cold with fury. "Viper 2-1, you are ordered to return to base immediately and report to the commanding officer. You have violated direct orders. This transmission is being recorded. Do you acknowledge?" "Acknowledged, Overlord. Viper 2-1 is RTB." Morgan banked the Strike Eagle toward home base, her heart still pounding from the adrenaline of combat. Next to her, Rattler was silent. She knew what was coming. Court-martial, probably. Dishonorable discharge, maybe. Her career was over. But those 47 vehicles would never reach the front lines. Those weapons would never kill American soldiers. And sometimes, that was worth the price. "You know they're going to crucify us, right?" Rattler said quietly. "Yeah," Morgan replied. "I know." "Was it worth it?" Morgan looked down at the burning convoy one last time before it disappeared behind her. "Ask the soldiers who won't die tomorrow because those supplies never arrived." The flight back to base took 40 minutes. Morgan spent the time thinking about her career, about the decision she'd made, about whether she'd do it again if given the choice. The answer was yes. She'd do it again in a heartbeat. When she landed, there was a security detail waiting on the tarmac. They escorted her directly from the aircraft to the wing commander's office, not even giving her time to remove her flight gear. Rattler was taken to a separate room for debriefing. Colonel Sarah Hendricks was sitting behind her desk. When Morgan entered, her expression unreadable. The wing commander was a veteran of Desert Storm and countless combat operations since, a pilot who'd risen through the ranks on merit and skill. "Sit down, Captain," she said, her voice neutral. Morgan sat, still wearing her flight suit and harness, her helmet under her arm. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Hendricks began. "You directly disobeyed a lawful order. You ignored a stand-down command. You engaged a target that command explicitly ordered you not to attack. This is the most serious breach of military discipline I've seen in 20 years. "Yes, ma'am, I understand. "Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, you just ended your career. You'll face a court-martial. You'll likely be dismissed from the service. Everything you've worked for, gone." Morgan met her commander's eyes. "With respect, ma'am, I'd do it again. That convoy was a legitimate military target. There were no civilians. The intel was wrong. And if I'd followed orders, those vehicles would be at the front lines right now, and American soldiers would be dying." "You don't know that." "Yes, ma'am, I do. Because I've been flying combat missions for 8 years, and I know what happens when enemy reinforcements reach the fight." Hendricks leaned back in her chair, studying Morgan for a long moment. "Captain Morrison, your WSO, says the same thing. He insists the convoy was a valid military target and that you made the right call. He's telling the truth, ma'am. Intel is reviewing the gun camera footage now. They're also analyzing signals intelligence and ground reports." Hendricks paused. "Preliminary assessment suggests you might be right. There's no evidence of civilian presence anywhere near that convoy. It appears to have been a pure military formation." Morgan felt a flicker of hope, but quickly suppressed it. Even if she was right about the target, she'd still disobeyed orders. "However," Hendricks continued, "that doesn't change the fact that you violated the chain of command. You put your judgment above that of your commanding officers. That's a problem, Captain." "Yes, ma'am." The colonel stood and walked to the window, looking out at the flight line where aircraft were being prepped for the next day's missions. For a long moment, she said nothing, and Morgan felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her. Her entire career hung in the balance, dependent on the decision of this one woman. "I've been in command for 3 years, Hendricks said finally, still looking out the window. "In that time, I've had to make countless decisions about pilots under my command. Who gets promoted? Who gets the best assignments? Who gets grounded for safety violations?" She turned to face Morgan. "But I've never had to decide what to do with a pilot who deliberately disobeyed orders to engage a target." "Ma'am, if I may." "You may not. I'm not finished." Hendricks's voice was sharp. "Do you know what the easy decision would be here? Court-martial you. Make an example. Show every pilot in this wing that insubordination will not be tolerated. That would be easy. Clean. It would send a message." Morgan's stomach tightened. This was it. The hammer was about to fall. "But I didn't become a wing commander by making easy decisions," Hendricks continued. 20 years ago, I made a similar decision. Intelligence said there were civilians in a building we were supposed to strike. I had clear visual confirmation that the building was a command post full of enemy officers. I made the call to engage despite the stand-down order." Morgan said nothing, sensing there was more to come. "Turned out I was right. The intel was wrong. The building was a legitimate military target, and taking it out disrupted enemy operations for weeks." Hendricks turned back to face Morgan. "They still grounded me for 3 months while they investigated. Nearly ended my career. But sometimes, Captain, the right decision isn't the same as the easy decision." "Yes, ma'am. Here's what's going to happen. You're grounded pending a full investigation. So is Captain Morrison. Intel will review every frame of gun camera footage, every piece of intercept data, every ground report. If they confirm that the convoy was a military target and there was no civilian presence, you'll be reinstated with a formal reprimand in your file. If they find evidence that there were civilians and you missed them, then God help you, because I won't be able to." "I understand, ma'am." Dismissed. Morgan stood and saluted, then turned to leave. "Captain?" She stopped at the door. "Yes, ma'am." "Off the record." Hendricks allowed herself a small smile. That was some damn fine flying. 47 vehicles in one strike. That's going to be taught at the weapons school for years. "Thank you, ma'am." Morgan left the office and walked across the base to her quarters, her mind racing. She'd rolled the dice and now had to wait to see how they landed. But she didn't regret it. She'd seen that convoy, knew what it was carrying, understood what would happen if it reached its destination. She'd made the right call. Now, she just had to hope the investigation would prove it. 3 days earlier, Morgan had been in the squadron ready room when the briefing began, reviewing weather data and mission parameters for what was supposed to be a routine patrol. The operations officer, Major Tom Blake, stood at the front of the room with a large map displayed on the screen behind him. All right, people, listen up. We've got new intelligence on enemy movements in Sector 7. Over the past week, we've observed increased convoy activity moving south toward our front lines. These convoys are carrying weapons, ammunition, and reinforcements. Command wants them stopped. Morgan leaned forward, interested. This was the kind of mission she'd trained for, striking deep targets that threatened American forces. The problem, Blake continued, is that these convoys are smart. They're moving at night, using routes that mix military and civilian traffic, and they're dispersed enough that it's hard to get good targeting data. We've taken out a few small elements, but the major formations keep slipping through. What's the ROE? Someone asked. Rules of engagement were always the first question. Tight. Very tight. We need positive identification of military targets with no civilian presence before we're cleared to engage. Command is worried about collateral damage affecting the political situation, so we need to be absolutely certain before we start dropping bombs. Morgan understood the caution, but she also knew that overly restrictive ROE sometimes let legitimate targets escape. It was a constant tension in modern warfare, the need for precision versus the need for effectiveness. Viper flight, that's Phillips and Morrison. You'll be on standby tonight for rapid response. If we get good intel on a convoy, you'll scramble and engage. Questions? What's our expected ordnance load? Morgan asked. Heavy strike package, 8 GBU-38s full gun ammunition, and external fuel tanks. You'll have 3 hours of loiter time if needed. The briefing continued for another 20 minutes, covering weather, communications protocols, and emergency procedures. When it ended, Morgan headed to the flight line to check her aircraft. The F-15E Strike Eagle was waiting in its hardened shelter, already being prepped by the ground crew. Morgan walked around the aircraft performing her pre-flight inspection with the same methodical care she'd learned as a young lieutenant. The Strike Eagle was a beautiful machine, a 2-seat all-weather fighter bomber that could engage targets on the ground and in the air with equal lethality. "She's all yours, Captain," the crew chief said, handing Morgan a clipboard with the maintenance status. 8 JDAMs loaded and armed, guns hot with 512 rounds. Fuel tanks are topped off. She's ready to fight. "Thanks, Chief. She looks good." Morgan climbed into the cockpit and began her internal checks. Every switch, every button, every system had to be verified. A fighter aircraft was a complex machine with thousands of parts, and any one of them could fail at the worst possible moment. The pre-flight check was about catching problems before they became emergencies. Rattler climbed into the back seat, settling into the WSO position with practiced ease. He'd been Morgan's backseater for 2 years, and they'd flown over 100 missions together. They trusted each other completely, which was essential when you were strapped into a fighter aircraft at 40,000 feet. "All systems nominal back here," Rattler reported. "Targeting pod is online, radar's green, weapon systems check complete. We're good to go." "Copy. Let's sit tight and wait for the call." They waited for 3 hours. Morgan used the time to study the tactical situation, reviewing maps and intelligence reports on her tablet. The enemy was getting smarter, adapting their tactics to avoid American air power. But they still needed to move supplies, which meant convoys had to use roads, and roads meant they were vulnerable. At 0217 hours, the call came. "Viper flight, scramble. We have intel on a large convoy moving south on Highway 7. This is your tasking. Get airborne immediately." Morgan and Rattler were already strapped in. The ground crew had kept the aircraft ready to launch. "Viper 2-1 is rolling," Morgan transmitted, starting the engines and beginning her taxi to the runway. 4 minutes later, the Strike Eagle leaped into the night sky, afterburners blazing as Morgan climbed to altitude. She retracted the landing gear and accelerated to 450 knots, the aircraft eating up the miles toward the target area. Overlord, Viper 2-1 is airborne and proceeding to target area. Request full brief on the convoy. Viper 2-1, Overlord. Intel indicates approximately 40 to 50 vehicles moving south on Highway 7 at grid coordinates. November Victor 4728. Convoy composition appears to be primarily military with possible civilian vehicles mixed in. You are cleared to observe and report, but hold weapons tight until we can confirm target composition. Copy, holding weapons tight. ETA to target area is 12 minutes. The flight to the target area was uneventful. Morgan climbed to 25,000 feet, high enough to be invisible and inaudible from the ground. The Strike Eagle's sophisticated sensors could see everything below while remaining completely undetected. I've got the highway on radar, Rattler called, picking up multiple returns. Looks like a large formation, moving at approximately 40 kilometers per hour. Targeting pod coming online. Morgan activated the AN/AAQ-13 LANTIRN pod, which gave her a high-resolution infrared view of the ground below. The image appeared on her display, crisp and clear despite the darkness. And there it was, the convoy. It stretched for miles, vehicle after vehicle moving in an organized column. Morgan zoomed in on the lead elements, studying their configuration. Military trucks, a PCS with visible weapons, fuel tankers, ammunition carriers. Everything about the formation screamed military target. Overlord, Viper 2-1. I have visual on the convoy. Count 47 vehicles, all military in appearance. No civilian traffic observed. This looks like a pure military formation. Request clearance to engage. The response came after a long pause. Viper 2-1, hold position. Intel is reviewing your imagery. Stand by. Morgan held the aircraft in a lazy orbit above the convoy, watching it crawl south toward the front lines. Every minute that passed was another kilometer closer to American positions. Overlord, Viper 2-1. Be advised, this convoy will reach our forward positions within 24 hours if it maintains current speed. Recommend immediate engagement. Viper 2-1, continue to observe. We're still assessing the target. 5 more minutes passed. The convoy continued moving, oblivious to the predator circling above. Morgan's frustration grew with each passing second. This was exactly the kind of target they needed to hit. A major enemy formation in the open, away from civilian areas, carrying weapons that would be used against American forces. What are they waiting for? Rattler muttered. Politics, Morgan replied. Someone up the chain is worried about the optics of striking a convoy, even if it's a legitimate target. Then the order came, the one that would change everything. Viper 2-1, this is Overlord. You are not cleared to engage. Intel assessment indicates potential civilian presence. RTB immediately. Morgan stared at her display, at the military convoy that was so clearly a valid target, and made the decision that would define her career. She switched off the command frequency and prepared to attack. The investigation. For 3 days, Morgan sat in her quarters while Intel analyzed every frame of gun camera footage, every piece of signals intelligence, every ground report they could gather. She wasn't allowed to fly, wasn't allowed to participate in squadron operations. She was in limbo, waiting to find out if her career was over. The waiting was worse than combat. In combat, you made decisions and saw immediate results. Here, she had no control, no ability to influence the outcome. She could only wait while others decided her fate. She spent the time reviewing the mission in her mind, analyzing every decision, every moment. Had she missed something? Was there any possibility that civilians had been in that convoy? She replayed the targeting pod footage mentally, frame by frame, looking for any evidence that would contradict her assessment. There was none. Every vehicle had been military. Every truck had carried military cargo. The convoy formation, the movement pattern, the route, everything about it screamed military operation, but doubt gnawed at her anyway. What if she was wrong? What if there had been something she missed in the heat of the moment? Rattler visited on the second day, looking as stressed as she felt. "Any word?" he asked. "Nothing. You?" "Same. They've got me on administrative hold. Can't fly, can't even go to the squadron." He sat down heavily. My wife called. She's worried. Word's gotten around base that we're under investigation for disobeying orders. I'm sorry I dragged you into this. You didn't drag me anywhere. I made my own choice to support you. Rattler paused. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't worried. We're in the same situation. Either we're vindicated or we're both finished. Rattler was in the same situation, though he seemed less worried. We did the right thing, he kept saying. The footage will prove it. On the fourth day, Colonel Hendricks summoned Morgan back to her office. The investigation is complete, the colonel said without preamble. Intel has reviewed all the evidence. Signals intercepts confirm that the convoy was indeed a military formation, elements of the enemy's 3rd Mechanized Brigade moving to reinforce positions at the front. Ground reports indicate no civilian vehicles were part of the convoy. The imagery analysis confirms your assessment. Morgan felt relief wash over her, but she kept her expression neutral. Furthermore, Hendricks continued, intelligence has confirmed that the supplies in that convoy were critical to planned enemy offensive operations. By destroying it, you disrupted their entire operational timeline. The attack has likely saved American lives. Thank you, ma'am. Don't thank me yet. You still disobeyed a direct order. Command wants to make an example of you. Hendricks leaned forward. However, I've argued that the order was based on faulty intelligence, and that you made the correct tactical decision with the information available to you. The wing commander agrees with my assessment. What does that mean, ma'am? It means you're not facing a court-martial. You will receive a formal reprimand for failure to follow proper procedures. That reprimand will stay in your file and will likely affect your promotion prospects, but you'll be returned to flight status immediately. Morgan nodded slowly. A reprimand was a slap on the wrist compared to what she'd been expecting. There's more, Hendricks said. Your strike has been reviewed by the weapons school. The precision of your attack, the tactics you employed, the effectiveness of the engagement, all of it is being studied as a case example of successful convoy interdiction. They're calling it a textbook strike. I just did what needed to be done, ma'am. Yes, you did. And in doing so, you demonstrated the kind of judgment that makes a good pilot into a great one. But you also demonstrated a willingness to ignore orders when you disagree with them, and that's a problem. Hendricks stood. So here's my guidance, Captain. You're one of the best strike pilots I've ever seen. But being a great pilot isn't enough. You need to learn to work within the system, to trust that the chain of command has information and perspective that you might not have. I understand, ma'am. I hope you do, because next time you might not be right. Next time the intel might be correct and you might be wrong. And if you've trained yourself to ignore orders, that could get people killed. Hendricks walked to the door and opened it. You're dismissed. Report to the flight line tomorrow at 0600. You've got missions to fly. Morgan saluted and left, her mind whirling. She'd kept her career, barely, but the colonel's words stuck with her. What if next time she was wrong? What if the intel was right and she was the one missing something? Those were uncomfortable questions without easy answers. Back in the squadron ready room, the other pilots greeted her with a mixture of respect and caution. Word had spread about what she'd done, and opinions were divided. Some thought she was a hero. Others thought she was reckless. Most were just glad they hadn't been in her position. Rattler was waiting by her locker. How'd it go? Formal reprimand. Back on flight status. Could have been worse. Could have been a lot worse. We got lucky. Yeah. Morgan opened her locker and pulled out her flight gear. But the colonel's right. We took a huge risk. If we'd been wrong, but we weren't. We made the right call. This time. Next time we might not be so lucky. Rattler studied her for a moment. You having second thoughts? No, I'd do it again. But I understand now why the system exists. Why there are procedures and protocols. It's not just bureaucracy. It's there to prevent mistakes. So what are you going to do next time you see a target and command says no? Morgan thought about that for a long moment. I don't know. Hope I don't have to find out. 6 months later. The briefing room was packed with pilots from across the Air Force, all gathered at Nellis Air Force Base for the annual weapons school graduation. Morgan sat in the back row, watching as the instructors reviewed lessons learned from recent combat operations. And now we're going to discuss a case study in convoy interdiction, the instructor said, pulling up imagery on the screen. This strike was conducted 6 months ago by Captain Morgan Phillips, call sign Viper 21. She engaged and destroyed a 47-vehicle convoy in a single attack run. Morgan sank a little lower in her seat as every head in the room turned to look at her. The instructor walked through the engagement in detail: the initial surveillance, the weapons employment, the tactics used to trap and destroy the convoy. This represents the gold standard for this type of mission. Captain Phillips demonstrated exceptional situational awareness, precise weapons employment, and tactical flexibility. The enemy convoy was completely destroyed, with zero collateral damage. "What about the controversy?" someone asked. "Didn't she disobey orders?" The instructor nodded. "That's part of the lesson here. Captain Phillips made a tactical judgment call based on the information available to her. She assessed that the intel was wrong and that the target was valid. Turned out she was correct, but that doesn't mean it was the right decision to ignore orders." "So what's the takeaway?" another pilot asked. "The takeaway is that combat is complex. Sometimes you'll face situations where the right tactical decision conflicts with the orders you've received. In those moments, you need to use your judgment, but you also need to understand that you'll be held accountable for that judgment." Captain Phillips was willing to accept the consequences of her decision, and that's part of what made it the right call for her. The briefing continued for another hour, covering other aspects of the strike. When it ended, several pilots approached Morgan to ask questions and get her perspective. She answered honestly, emphasizing both the tactical success and the career risk she'd taken. As she was leaving, an older colonel approached her. "Captain Phillips, I'm Colonel James Mitchell. I'm the one who gave the order for you to stand down that night." Morgan stiffened. "Sir." "Relax, Captain. I'm not here to rake you over the coals. I wanted to tell you that I've reviewed the full intelligence package from that mission. You were right. The intel we had was wrong. That convoy was a military target, and engaging it was the correct decision." "Thank you, sir." "I also wanted to apologize. I made a risk-averse decision based on incomplete information." "You made a bold decision based on what you could see with your own eyes. You were the one in the cockpit. You had the better picture. I should have trusted your judgment." Morgan didn't know what to say to that. "I've put a letter in your file," Mitchell continued. "It states that your decision to engage was tactically sound and that the stand-down order was based on faulty intelligence. It should help counterbalance the reprimand. Probably won't get you promoted any faster, but it'll make sure people understand the full context." "I appreciate that, sir." Mitchell nodded and walked away, leaving Morgan standing in the hallway processing what had just happened. 6 months ago, she'd thought her career was over. Now she was being taught as a case study at the weapons school, and the officer who'd ordered her to stand down was apologizing and putting supporting documentation in her file. Military careers were strange things. She walked out to the parking lot where Rattler was waiting by his car. "How'd it go?" he asked. "Surreal. They're teaching our strike at the weapons school, and the colonel who gave us the stand-down order just apologized and said we made the right call." "So we're heroes now?" Morgan shook her head. "I don't know about heroes, but maybe we're an example of what happens when you trust your training and your judgment, even when it's hard." They drove back to their base in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Morgan thought about the convoy, about the decision she'd made, about all the soldiers who were alive because those 47 vehicles had never delivered their cargo. She thought about the reprimand in her file and the letter of support that now sat beside it. She thought about what she'd do if faced with the same situation again. The answer, she realized, was still the same. She'd trust her training, her eyes, and her judgment. She'd make the call that saved lives, even if it cost her career. Because that's what it meant to be a fighter pilot. To put yourself on the line, to take responsibility for life and death decisions, to accept that sometimes the right choice was also the hardest choice. Command had said the convoy was untouchable. She'd prove them wrong, and she'd do it again if she had to, because 47 vehicles destroyed meant hundreds of American soldiers who came home alive. And that was worth everything. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories every day.